G'day, I'm Ash, welcome back to the channel. Today we've been taking a look at the M4A2 Sherman late production. We've restored two other Shermans thus far in the series, and you'll be able to see that at a later date, but we've still got two more Shermans after this being the jumbo variant with unique suspension. Its engine's just sitting over here in its own cradle, which looks to be different from the radial engines that we've been having a look at. And then there is the T34 Calliope, or Calliope as some people call it. I'm not entirely sure what the best pronunciation for this thing is, but we'll be checking this out probably in the next episode. I'll probably leave the jumbo for last, who knows. Anyway, we're taking a look at a late production variant Sherman, which is an interesting sort of vehicle on its own. But it's just another Sherman, and for the most part, all the parts seem to be exactly the same as that of the two other tanks that I restored earlier. Although, the only difference is, well, the mid-production variant has the D-Day snorkels, whereas this is the late variant, and it has a different engine and slightly different welding, and the gears are slightly different, and, well, the game doesn't really captivate that too well. As far as I understand, it just feels like the exact same click, pull part apart, restore it, de-rustify it, and then obviously spray and what do they call it, sandblast the living hell out of the things. So again, not exactly the greatest, but again, this engine looks to be, to me, two V8s stuck together. Although I could be wrong in that. I didn't count the cylinders. It just looks quite funky, and the way that you restore a vehicle and just go back to bare metal without actually like lubricating or protectively coating it. I don't know, it's a bit weird, but that's the limitations of the game. And I wish for future vehicles we'll be able to use those overhead sort of cranes so we can actually lift components around. That'd be better in my opinion, just having them magically appear on the turret stand and the engine stand. Anyhow, we've actually got some welding to do. There's a welding spot, and now we're taking a look at disassembly. I'm going to restore all the pieces that I possibly can, or at least rust them and go through every single part that I possibly can, and we'll come back when we actually have a vehicle to restore, and I'll have it in bits and pieces, because, well, these episodes do go for 50 minutes long, and on my birthday, considering it's my birthday today, I don't really want to actually sit here for 50 minutes talking about Shermans, because I don't actually know a great deal about them outside of what has been presented to me in media. Okay, with the exterior basically almost done, we only have one welding spot to do. Sometimes the various vehicles have a lot more welding spots that you actually need to fix, and I thought there was one down here on the bottom of the hull, but looks can be quite deceiving. Anyway, we've gone and repainted everything, we've gone and outsourced everything, so now it's a matter of buying the remainder of the parts so we can actually assemble the living daylight to the tank. Now, I could buy the parts or craft the elements, but I don't have the blueprints for this thing yet, and I haven't really experimented with that yet, so it's going to cost us $94,259 in order to buy the remainder of the parts that we need. Saves us having to scrounge around and find the same variant Shermans over and over and over again, just to recycle a few parts. But hey, let's start with the turret assembly. Oh, actually, I don't know. I feel like we should just randomly assign things and just put them wherever. I haven't really thought about where I would start, so let's try and get everything done to the interior of the vehicle, because that is obviously the most important thing you should get done as early as possible, because once you put everything else back together, it becomes a lot harder of a challenge. Sorry, I can't put those items in. There are a few items that glitch in and out, so usually towards the end of a build, I then double check the analytics system to make sure that I've got absolutely everything installed, because sometimes it can get a bit confusing when you're installing things and there is like white boxes overlaying other things and other items get in the way of certain other items, and it can get quite confusing, if that makes some semblance of sense. Now I'm just double checking everything. Apparently you can open and close the driver's hatches, which I find pretty interesting, but we won't do that one. We'll just install periscope controls and various other bits and pieces. The hull ammo rack and the machine gun base and some of the other things. Now, the reason I don't do excavations in this game primarily is because you can actually go out and excavate one of these tanks. Probably just the time it takes to actually get through and restore, or at least pick up a vehicle. So it can be really, really annoying when you're trying to just restore vehicles and get achievements. Going to a dig site isn't exactly the first thing you really want to do. Although you can get a lot of the curated items, you can actually get stuff for your museum that makes your museum more interesting other than just the tanks. I do say that this happens to be probably the best part of the game, is actually restoring the vehicles rather than going on a dig site and having to dig one up, for example. Now I'm going to try and put in some of the gear stuff first. I didn't realise how big the differentials were. As I said in previous episodes, you don't really realise how big a vehicle is until you actually sort of have a brief look at the size and how it feels. Alright, we're going to install the differential housing unit here. And the shaft as well. That way we can actually go through and just fiddle bits. Again, I just pick things. Oh, goodness me, those engine floors. Look how many screws there are. This is going to take a while. Sometimes the screws get stuck as well. That's an annoying thing. Look, happening right here. Come back to you in a second. But for the most part, this game does get rather repetitive at this stage. It's not for a lack of installing or uninstalling things. I'm trying to actually install them now. Come on. There we go. No, that one's not going anywhere. Sometimes the screws just don't like the direction or don't like... Yes, I'm spamming my mouse around. Sometimes you've got to use circular motion. Sometimes you just got to hold click and it will go up. For some reason this one is being an utter pain, and I get that quite a lot. Oh, yeah, okay, that one didn't quite like that one. Come on. Last one. Sometimes it's to do with the movement or the place of your last mouse, so... or at least your last movement, so it can be a bit troublesome, but that's okay. Install the exhaust as well. Over here, we may as well just shove everything we possibly can on the vehicle while we're here. Put the back shelf on, which also acts as an infantry seat. Let's go shove absolutely everything on the outside of the vehicle as well. We've got a heap of stuff here. Too much to cover. I think we'll go into a time lapse. Essentially what you saw me doing was installing some of the radiators, the fuel hoses, the various other fan shrouds, and obviously the oil lines, including the fuel tanks and various other componentry. So this is where it gets a bit messy because you can't tell whether or not you've actually installed absolutely everything, because sometimes they need fuel caps and various other little things. It does get a little bit, oh yeah, that's right, just put that on top because then another item might come along. Anyway, and then it gets confusing. When you're dealing with the interior, then it's like, oh, but there's these exterior units that you also have to install. So again, the interior could use a bit of work. See, look, it's already looking like some of the bits I haven't done is on the outside. And I get that's what you're trying to showcase, but when I'm looking on the inside, I don't want to be looking at the things that I can do on the outside. It's not the point of the vehicle. You don't have X-ray vision like that in the real world. Anyway, having just spent the last 20 minutes installing tracks, bogies, and suspension, which is all the same from all the previous episodes, we're just installing the gear and different housing at the moment because, well, this is one of the core crucial parts of a Sherman. In our later models, they did clarify and actually make the differential housing a little more sustainable and at least a mainstream unit. In the early models, it's split into 3 consecutive parts and then they'll cast, and imagine having to do repairs in the field. I mean, absolutely nightmare. Later models allowed you to sort of winch things off and do stuff, but tank maintenance is no joke. When I'm thinking about doing these kind of times, I think, okay, installing a front guard, that's pretty self-explanatory. When I'm talking about doing a gearbox and doing a Sherman gearbox, we have to hang some piece of metal and various other transmission fluids and all sorts of things. That gets a little more complicated because, I mean, just look at the size of the transmission. It basically makes up, a good portion of the front half of the vehicle, and I get that's how the vehicle was designed, but yeah, I don't know. Anyway. Now I'm just going to install all the differential plates on all the various other front axles and the differential bolts and various other bits and pieces. I'm glad that the game labels these because I wouldn't have a foggiest of what they're actually called. But a differential is allowing the torque from the transmission to then run through these gears and allow you to move the vehicle. Now, I've never driven a tank. I've driven trains before. I've flown an aircraft. I've driven jet skis and various other bits and pieces, but I've never driven a tank. So that's something that I want to do on my on a wish list for me eventually is learn how to drive a tank, just because it's quite interesting. It's a different experience. A lot of people tell me that it's quite scary when you're doing about 35 to 40 kilometers an hour in a tank, because the element of you sliding around is increasingly higher, due to the fact that your sprocket is pulling a load of sort of wheels along. The tracks themselves act like ice skates in a way, a bit of weird sort of cacophony. And I've heard of some tank owners and private collections, driving their tanks off cliffs and various other things by accident, running into lampposts and various other bits and pieces. So, hey, it's quite an interesting time. Anyway, we're installing all of the diff housings. We've got the spacers and we're putting the brake differentials and obviously the final drive and some of the other gearboxes in. This is a painful little thing because there's every single little gear and every single shaft is there modeled really. And it's a good model. I like it, but it is quite a tedious thing to sit there and go through absolutely everything. Imagine if you don't have some of these parts, or you miss a part in restoration with it when it comes to this particular machine. It's a nightmare to then have to pull everything apart and then go after one single item. Anyhow, restoration in this game is probably the main focus of it. I understand that's game limitation, but again, I'd love to see some more mini games or various other bits and pieces where you have to pull the vehicle apart, or various bits and pieces. I do feel like the lack of using the cranes as a part of a mini game, so you actually have to take the turret off the top, or place the turret on top of the vehicle and make sure it's aligned. Stuff like that is a missed opportunity, but I'm sure that they'll go ahead and do something about it anyway. Now, because of my lack of knowledge on Shermans, it has been quite fascinating to observe the difference in the models as we've been restoring the various different versions. At first, everything was cast and in single different pieces, particularly when it comes to the transmission on the front. And this time, at least, there is, a bit of a difference and a bit of a sort of, a single cast piece rather than multiple different parts. But again, what you're just giantly assembling here is not just a tank, but a giant Lego set of thousands of individually manufactured pieces that have to go together somehow in order to support a sort of a infantry, anti-tank units or various other bits and pieces. So it reminds me of this one A-Team video, or should I say, it was actually a TV show. And this episode where they restore a Sherman over 2 parts, and they take this Sherman and assault a bunker. And it's like, they're doing all this stuff and MacGyvering and various other bits and pieces. And I thought, must have been really quite easy to get that Sherman up and running, especially when you've got Mr. T running around, repairing everything frantically, or B.A. Baracus. It was just kind of a fascinating thing. And I always thought that tank restoration would probably be a very hard thing comparatively to how they actually presented it in the TV show. And turns out, that's exactly what it is. You get rusted out holes, you've got to do, like any restoration work, it takes time. And, you've got to figure out how you're going to restore it. You've got to figure out what you're going to restore and then to what detail, So I just find that quite fascinating. But TV shows and movies aside, the vehicles themselves are very, very impressive, no matter what theatre they are in. And it's disappointing to see that there isn't a Sherman that has a Firefly gun, or maybe even a post-war Sherman included within this DLC. At the moment, it just feels like 5 Shermans, and 3 of them are virtually similar, aside from maybe a few minor details, excluding engine and potentially a few minor parts. And then the suspension systems are all the same, so you're basically doing that 5 times or 6 times over. I haven't tried the Calliope yet, or the Jumbo. I hope the Jumbo is a different thing, but the first thing that I did notice was that the engine was completely different, and same with some of the fuel and some of the fuel lines and some of the coolants in there. Instead of having a massive aviation engine, they've gone for what appears to be 2 blocks or 2 engines, or 2 independent engines that have been running onto one system. Which is quite ironic, because the Australians were the ones that really took part in that kind of practice. Slamming at one point 3 V8s into a Sentinel would have been fantastic to see the Sentinel in this game at some point. But we really had no other choice. We had a couple of license-produced vehicles that we're producing down here, and so we just decided to slap two engines together and shove it on a torque case and two independent clutches and various other bits and pieces, and bam, you have a unit that you can basically drive together. So I'm wondering at what point of the development where they got the two independent engines together and shoved a unique housing on it, that they decided to actually switch over from an aviation engine, which can be quite annoying to maintain, to something slightly easier to maintain on the field. I don't know, food for thought. And of course, we're shoving all the piston rods in, and this just takes a lot of time. You're just sitting there, just zoomed in, basically trying to place as many pieces into this puzzle as it possibly can. And unlike the other game, Aircraft Mechanic Simulator, which doesn't give you any hints at where anything's supposed to go, you've just got to sort of right-click all the time and just basically just put the vehicle back together, which isn't really as fun as I had hoped, but... Rightio, we've got the remainder of the fuel lines, last minute inspections to all the items, making sure that we've placed everything on the vehicle, tow rope bracket, various other bits and pieces. It's a lot of fun when you're finally looking at the internals. As you can see here, we've got couple of fuel hoses. We've done most of the wheels, the engines are all done. Let's also just make sure that we go and do all the fuel caps and the oil caps and various other little bits and pieces. I didn't realise how many fluid storages there were inside the back of this thing. The earlier versions, they kind of just have a couple of rudimentary oil lines. They don't have too much going on, but as the tank progresses, it kind of gets worse and worse. So yeah, fuel system, wheels, engine, gearbox, and tracks are done. Hull interior is done. Hull exterior, I've got this weird grill thing, which for some reason won't install properly. Oh, there we go. Now we've actually installed it. 86.86 way through. The turret exterior is not looking too good, and the engine itself, let's just move that back because we finished the engine. Now we've got to go on and actually build the remainder of this vehicle, which is the turret. So, installing all the items on the inside should be pretty quick, right? No. The game's decided that you need to install each individual box with its individual box lids and various other hatches, so it does get quite annoying. You know, gunner fire controls, the hydraulic systems for various things, and I don't really think I've learned a lot about the interior of a Sherman. This game does really push that limit though, because this is like the third Sherman where I've actually gone through and, well, made modifications to, and just slammed in a bunch of stuff. It's quite a lot, so, you know, it is what it is. Anyway, we're going to put on the hatches, the air fans, the Lotus hatch, the radio mounts, the electrical bits and termini, and various other bits and pieces. It's just a lot of work, you know, and this is a video game, right? It's tedious, but in the real world, it'd be even more tedious to try and install most of these things. Most of the boxes wouldn't go in, most of the heavy stuff would go in first. You then put your bigger parts in, you do your gun breech and everything else primarily first, because that's the big hole you need to sort of shove in there. As you can see, we've got a mantlet piece that needs to be screwed in, and I don't understand, some of the parts are actually floating, and I get that every part doesn't need to be screwed in, but yeah, at least have us do some welding or something, various other bits and pieces, I don't know. Put the cannon cradle in, then I've got the recoil cylinders, the stabilizers, and I'll just right-click and keep going until I actually put the barrel in. I thought there was a little bit more to the breech system than that, but we're going to put in some of the hatches, the gun breech, and just right-clicking over, just hovering over things, just shoving stuff inside the turret. Alright, there it is, the gunner cage. Now we've got the box lids and various other box doors, seat frames for your Lotus seat, and the turret rotation lock, as well as the traverse and elevation and your periscope controls. That's fine and dandy, but we've still got to install the periscopes as well for the commander. We still have the elevation locks and a couple of other smaller bits as well. There we go. Put in some box lids, and I can't see. There's a master switch. powered traverse as well as the oil lines. Again, these things would have been installed well before you put those items in. There we go. And then we've got the oil outline and the MG pendle on the very top of the turret here for the commander to use, as well as a searchlight. Searchlight was an interesting addition. You don't see many Shermans with that kind of searchlight anymore. Anyway, let me go have a look at that turret interior. Okay, 96%, we've got 2 elevation locks, and that's it. Thankfully, there is a statistics screen that tells you what's what. These 2 tiny little bolts here is all that was missing from the interior of the turret. And there we are, 100%, 100%, 100%. Everything is 100%, which means we can put this back on the Sherman. And there we are. I think we're almost done here. Let's have a look. We're actually going to put this vehicle away inside the museum first and foremost. I get the achievement for it. Slot 11, I think it is. Ta-da! There it is. The achievement down the bottom right. Go into the museum. Let's have a look here. Everything's 99%. I think I missed a part on the outside of the vehicle. Should be 100% overall, and I can't seem to find which of what it is. So, you know, that is what it is. But alas, that is another Sherman production variant restored, and we don't even have to bother painting this one. I'm going to keep it in the green. For some reason I can access the travel lock. Interesting. Anyhow, we're going to dump this one now back into the warehouse, and that's basically a good game. Oh, that's cool. At least open those hatches. Oh yeah, we've restored an early Sherman, a D-Day Sherman without its sort of hood. There it is, swimming Sherman. And then this vehicle right here. So thank you very much for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed. We'll see you in the next episode soon as we restore the T-34 or the Jumbo. I don't know which one I'll do first. But that'll then end our fun times. Oh, hang on, there's a back seat here. Huh. So you could put a bunch of infantry on the back of there. That's cool. Anyway, my name is Ash. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll catch you next one. Bye-bye.